Hello guys, so today I'm going to be giving you my first impressions, well not first, but my impressions of the Division beta. And even though it's been 2 weeks since the beta ran, and it's only 4 days until it comes out. It's better late than never, and I'm gonna give my opinion on it. So overall, I actually enjoyed the beta and had a good experience from it. But there are a couple of niggles and major points that I'm going to make that really take away from the experience from me, and I may not be buying the game because of them. So first off, the first thing you see when you enter the game is the graphics, and I have to say that despite the downgrade from the last few years, it was very nice. It's a very nice looking game, and I enjoyed the diversity and the vibrance. I know it's a very dead world, but the vibrance of the game and the detail put into the city streets and the buildings and all that. But when I say detail, we'll come to that later on. Yeah, so the graphics were good, but I noticed big issues with performance. Now, I'm running an R9 380 and an i5 4460, and I was having stuttering in a lot of the areas on the map, some worse than others. I noticed near the home base was the worst. The frame rate was very inconsistent. Sometimes you'd have 60s and stable 60 at that, but other times I was dipping into the high 20s, low 30s, and it would stay there for a couple of seconds, and then it would go back up to the 40s, 50s, 60s. But it wasn't very consistent, and there was a lot of stuttering, and I had to run it at medium settings, which was quite surprising for me, since I believe I am above the recommended spec, which I assume is maybe above high settings at 1080p. So not very good for performance, but I suspect that they'll improve that by release, and they already probably have. Coming on to gameplay, well, I actually enjoyed the gun mechanics. The guns had a good variety, and they had decent kick. They weren't just lasers. And I enjoyed the cover-based system. It was very flowing. I liked the one-touch, whatever you want to call it, the one-touch movements, where you just hit, say, control to leap over an object or a piece of cover, or space to go out of it and then move on to the next one. I like the paths that it showed you, so you knew exactly where you would go and cover, and you could choose whether or not you would want to go there. The third person view I'm not a fan of in this sort of a shooter game. GTA 5 and games like that are the exception, where you can get away with it because they're not very serious. But here, say I'm walking around a corner, I can see the enemy and they can see me quite early. And if I was in first person view, that wouldn't be the case. So it takes away from the surprise of it. Like, say you're behind cover, and if you're in third person, you can tell where the other enemies are, so you can just, just point at them and shoot. But if you're in first person, they could be moving all over the place, and by the time you go back out of cover, they could have changed position completely. They could be right on top of you. They could be gone. They could be down the street. You never know. But in third person view, you can't really do that because you see them all the time. Speaking of enemies, the enemies were a bit dull, and I think they lacked variety. All I saw in the game were a bunch of, scavengers in hoodies, and they were not the most exciting enemies to fight. A lot of them just either stuck back, threw grenades at you, and charged with a bat. Also, probably the most talked about and biggest issue for me was the time to kill in the game. The time to kill in this game is very high. The enemies just soak up the bullets. You would have to empty maybe half a mag or even more to down an enemy, and usually the only viable way of killing one is to shoot them in the head. Now, usually in reality, one bullet at the head's going to kill you, and it's okay if it takes maybe 3. But here it's taking 7, 8, 9, 10 bullets in the head to put someone down when they have no armor except for a hoodie or a hat or something. So it is quite annoying, and I've seen people say, oh, but Borderlands 2 had a long time to kill and that was fine. But Borderlands 2 is not a realistic tactical shooter set in an open world New York against AI enemies with realistic M4s and MP5s and what have you. That was a quite unrealistic. I've never played it actually, but I've seen people play it and all that. But it's quite an unrealistic shooter with silly guns and silly enemies and stuff like that. Can't really be compared to The Division. Boss fights were very, very tedious and annoying and boring. I think there were 2 bosses in the entire beta, and both I really didn't enjoy. They had... The first one was one of the scavengers, and he was wearing a hoodie once again, and that hoodie should provide no protection for that boss, but it must have provided a lot of protection, because that person or enemy was soaking up so many bullets. It was unbelievable, and it was such a boring boss fight. You got into cover, you killed all his friends or whatever, and then he had a minigun or something like that, and he just you popped up once he wasn't shooting, and you started shooting him, and he would take a little bit of damage, and then you would see him getting ready to shoot again. You pop down and he fires a load of bullets in your direction, and they all hit the barrier or whatever you're behind, and you pop up again, and so on and so forth. So that was all the boss fight was. No tactics were involved. It was just a waiting game until he was finished shooting, and then you just shot him until he died. But it was very unrealistic how he was pretty much no different from the other enemies, like in terms of strength or anything like that. But I guess you could say, but Fallout 4 has legendary enemies and they take a lot of damage, but they don't take that much damage that you wouldn't be able to kill them in a couple of seconds with a powerful gun. These enemies go down, these bosses go down very, very slowly. It took me maybe 2 or 3 minutes to put them down, including all the other enemies. In terms of the missions, well, we went on 3 missions. First one, or was it? No, it was 2 missions. We went to save a doctor who was working for the enemy, and we went to save an electrician or mechanic or whatever. And the doctor mission was interesting. It was set in a basketball stadium. The 2 missions were just fetch this person, bring him back, open up the new base of operation, well, not base of operations, but section, and do an upgrade or 2. But the missions were okay. They were well structured and all that, but they got a bit boring. Like, I enjoyed the setting of them, and I enjoyed the one I enjoyed the most was the mechanic or electrician, who we had these interesting enemies that carried gas canisters, and I guess they had flamethrowers then. Yeah, they did. And it was actually quite fun shooting them in the back and watching them blow up. But anyway, that's if that's the highlight of the mission, then there's something wrong there. They were long missions, and they did pay okay. Meant I could get a couple of upgrades, but not too many. And they restricted access to the last mission. I forget what it was now. I think it was security, and I guess you'll be able to do that once the full game comes out. But yeah, the missions were quite unexciting. I would have liked a bit more variety. I'm saying variety a lot because that's one thing the game actually lacked. The game missions lacked variety. They had the same 2 missions basically, just different people in different locations. Other than that, side missions were also quite repetitive and boring. You had the virus data collection where you went to this terminal and you clicked on it, and then you had a 2, 3, 4 minute timer to go and find 1 or 2 others, and then upload that to a server. And that was it. That was the end of the mission, but it wasn't very challenging. I struggled with the first one just because I didn't really get like what you had to do. I didn't really read the instructions. But the second one, I just hit 1, and within 2 minutes out of the 5 or whatever, I had finished the mission. That's not really a good side mission, and hopefully there's more to come from that. The weapon selection and armor selection was quite good. You had your civilian armor and your police armor and your, I think there was military armor. And then you had the same for the rifles and pistols and machine guns and submachine guns. I don't think you were able to buy other machine guns. But also personal upgrades were... Did you get to do any? I'm not sure. But they seem to have an okay variety in personal upgrades. And that's one RPG element that I like. That you can personalize your character and choose what skills they have. Building upgrades were interesting, where you could slowly build up the base of operations with, say, quarantine in the clinic, or any sort of upgrade for the clinic. And you had to do the boring side missions to do that, but it does give you an end goal, so you're not just aimlessly going around doing the side missions. I didn't actually go into the Dark Zone. I didn't have time. I was going on holiday. So I didn't actually get to go into the Dark Zone, but I watched a couple of videos on it. And the first thing I knew about it was that the player limit is absolutely tiny for a Dark Zone of 3. It's 3 Dark Zones, I think, in the game, according to the map. And they're quite big. And if you only have 24 players, which is the player cap on the Dark Zone, and there's probably thousands playing, but they're all in different instances. But if you have 24 players spread out between 3 areas, which was it was about 3/4 the size of the beta zone, then you're not going to see much action, and you're going to see the same people, depending on if they leave or not, but you're going to see the same people over and over again. I saw one person playing the game, and they killed the same person 3 times in a couple of minutes. Like, that's a bit boring for the player killing them, and it's very annoying for the player that's being killed. And speaking of killing people, the impression I got from the players playing in the Dark Zone is they act the same way as every single survival open world game out there. You like Rust and DayZ and H1Z1. They just kill you on sight, and that's it. You get a team of 2 or 3 people, and you go around killing people and dancing on them and doing whatnot and betraying them. You might befriend them and then just betray them behind their back and steal all their loot and so on and so forth. And that is not the way I think Ubisoft intended it to be. I think they wanted a lot of teamwork, but I really doubt, considering how hostile players are in open world survival games, I really doubt that it's going to be the case. Also, I think solo players like myself are going to struggle in the game, because a lot of the Dark Zone consists of teamwork and working out where the enemy is. And if you don't have someone to back you up and spot players for you, or a second eye, then it's going to be very difficult to get the drop on someone. The good idea about the Dark Zone is that it has the most valuable loot in the game, and the enemies are tougher. Note that tougher usually means better bullet sponges, which is not good at all. But they are a little bit smarter, I think, and a little bit tougher to kill. And they do have the best loot in the game, so it's good that they've balanced the risk of going into the Dark Zone with good loot to get from it. The only problem is that they have these helicopter lift things where you get a certain... only a certain amount of people are allowed, send their loot off. So people can fight over who gets their loot sent back to their base and that sort of thing. The game is set in 2020 to 2030, I believe. And so the technology is quite advanced. Well, the HUD is actually quite interesting. I like how it provides a lot of information, but it doesn't take up the entire screen. And I like how it flows, where the weapon selection comes up on screen and you can swap between it and so on. But what I don't like is that sometimes I think it gives too much information, like the amount of armor left on a boss or the amount of health left on an enemy. And it's even worse in the Dark Zone, where you can actually see the health of a player, so you can know when they're gonna die and if you have the advantage over them. I don't think that's very good, because it doesn't it's giving you too much information. You shouldn't know if the enemy is about to die or is on full health. You can, if the enemy's health is low, you can just go, oh, okay, I'll put a couple more bullets in him. I have the advantage. Let's run out of cover and just shoot him. Also, like when an enemy throws a grenade, then you know when they're gonna throw it, so you can just run. If you didn't know how to throw it, you could get caught off guard. Leading on to the final point, gameplay wise, people have said that Ubisoft have claimed that this game is an RPG. An open world RPG, and I have to disagree with that, because an RPG, according to Wikipedia, is a game where you control the actions of the player. And even though you can control the actions, who lives and who dies, and what upgrades you want to do and so on, you don't really get to choose how the story goes on. And I'm not sure how deep the story is in the game. Could be just an open world game with just a tiny little bit of a side story. But if it does have a full-blown story, I doubt you can make important decisions. That's what I got from it. And there's no dialogue choices. You do have a new character, so it would have been interesting to see dialogue choices. And you don't have it, from the 2 missions you played, you don't have any choice in the missions. So if you didn't want to save the doctor or whatever, you could shoot them. It's up to you. If you didn't like her or whatever. But you can't really be evil and you can't really be good either. You're kind of observing the story of this person and having a little tiny bit of input in who they kill and so on. It's more of an open world shooter with RPG elements like the upgrade system and leveling system and looting than a full-blown RPG like Fallout 3 and 4 or Skyrim. For the map, I thought the city is very detailed. It was a bit unnerving seeing all the dead bodies and body bags lining the streets. It gave a sense of like how deadly this virus was and how desperate the struggle is to try and combat it now. Even though the city was detailed, it felt very lifeless. And yes, I know there is a lot of death going on in the city, but it felt very lifeless, as in you just walked through the city and you walked down streets, but you couldn't interact with anything. You couldn't interact with any of the buildings or objects on the street. I've heard people say it's a walking simulator, and I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but it definitely lacks depth in how the city was created. And I know that they've put a lot of hard work into modeling this city, but they could have opened up a lot more buildings for, say, I don't know, an ambush. If you wanted to, if you were in the dark zone and wanted to coordinate an ambush with your friends, and there was an enemy team coming down and you were stationed in houses across the street, you could just sit at the window and wait for them. But you can't do that because the buildings aren't enterable. It also, it's quite uneventful walking from place to place, and I know they're trying to get you to take in the environment and the atmosphere of the death and destruction of the city. But they could have added more random encounters. I know you can give a civilian a can of food or something to that extent, but there was no random encounters except for maybe scavengers. The lack of random encounters in the game, like aiding someone in need, maybe someone's about to get executed or something like that. There was a lack of that, and it made the trips to and from main missions quite uneventful. The only thing about the Dark Zone is, since you know there's a presence of other players there, it would make it quite tense, and I could see that being exciting. So I intended this to be quite a quick summary of the game, but it turns out I've been going for over 20 minutes now. So overall, I think I enjoyed the beta. For its many flaws, I think that could be ironed out before release. But whether Ubisoft chooses to or not, that's a different story. But yeah, I enjoyed it somewhat, but definitely I'm not considering buying it at release. I'm gonna wait for a while until maybe bugs are patched, and because it is a Ubisoft game, we can expect bugs. But, yeah, so I think I've said everything about what I think about the game. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and my little insight into the game. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like. If you disagreed with anything, maybe drop a dislike if you hate my opinion so much. But also leave a comment on your opinions on some of the topics I talked about. And perhaps any suggestions that you would have for future content, or any suggestions on how to improve my content would be greatly appreciated. So anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.